Hello, everyone. I'm Claire Novotny, a program manager on the .NET team at Microsoft and the executive director of the .NET Foundation. I couldn't have said it better myself, Andrew. I had it right here in the keynote materials. So I'm really happy to be here today. When I was invited to speak today, I was trying to come up with a topic, and I was thinking that open source has been on my mind a lot lately. And I got to thinking, wouldn't it be nice if all of our bugs were fixed for us? We'll come back to that later. When I was a young new student, one of my first experiences with open source was in college. So there I was, it was around the year 2001, using the betas of the first .NET framework. Does anyone else remember that? Put an X in the chat box here if that sounds like you. So it was the summer of 2001, and I was studying sociology, and I didn't have much going on back then except school. Back then, people would put their music and video collections on open file shares, but it wasn't easy to find them. Those were the days before all of the copyright lawsuits. People would email around popular open shares, and they'd be posted in random places. .NET had just come out, and I was already familiar with SQL Server and its full text searching capabilities. I thought to myself, how hard could it be to build a search engine? Yeah, right. What I needed was a fast way to scan the school's IP ranges and connect to those shares. There was a library I found that had the right network protocol, SMB1 CIFS, you know, that thing that is so insecure and is deprecated today. But it was in Java. Fortunately, it was open source, and I ported the library to C# and published the resulting source on SourceForge, I think, before eventually moving it to GitHub. I ported the library for two reasons. One, I needed it and I didn't want to use Java. And two, I made it open because I felt that others could learn from my efforts. I was always the kind of person who learned by example, by reading the code from others. I taught myself how to program at first by reading programs out of a book, and later, eventually, by downloading samples off the internet. How many of you learned to program HTML and JavaScript by using the view source component to check out how some site did something interesting? With C# being brand new, there were few examples. So I felt compelled to share what I had done so others could benefit. So who are open source developers? Who are the people that create these open libraries and programs that power so many enterprises these days? Who are open source contributors? Open source contributors are people just like you and me. They are parents. They get up in the morning. They have to go to work. They celebrate holidays. They drive to work, or at least they did before the pandemic. Now they're working remotely. They sometimes struggle with HR. They're dealing with unreasonable timelines. And a lot of folks also have to homeschool their kids. On top of that, there's all of this open source stuff. Who are open source developers? They are just ordinary people. For all of the big names you might read about online, on Twitter, Stack Overflow, there are hundreds more people like you quietly contributing. They may have jobs building out the IT for so-called non-tech companies in healthcare or hospitality. I'd argue that all companies are tech companies these days. They have families. They may not live and breathe tech 24/7, preferring to keep work at work and do other things outside of work. That's okay. That's normal. You can be good at your job without it being your hobby. And all of us are great at our jobs, right? We all write bug-free code, don't we? Real developers don't create bugs. It's always the other person causing problems, right? Some open source developers get paid by companies to maintain these projects, while others do it as a passion project in their spare time. I suspect most people who contribute to Kubernetes are paid to do it as part of their job. 8 of the 10 most popular GitHub projects are enterprise-backed, products of big tech companies like Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and IBM. Passion projects can be fun. They can be a fun way to learn a new technology or scratch an itch. You might think to yourself, wouldn't it be cool if a light came on when the garbage is almost full? And then go write some code to do that. You also might be surprised that there are many existing commercial solutions for this. You might also contribute a feature to a large existing project like Microsoft's Visual Studio Code or Google's TensorFlow. Both have large communities of independent contributors. That thing that's been bugging you, the thing that you wish you had the option for, you can usually contribute that back to the project or write an add-in to make things better. Other times, in the course of your regular work, on a regular, ordinary business application, you can split out the non-business specific functionality into a separate project that's open while keeping the secret sauce proprietary. The data access layer you need to call your REST API, the service locator that you use to find the closest instance, the way you aggregate information efficiently. Those kinds of things are the digital infrastructure that enable your business, but they're not your core business. Those kinds of things are prime candidates for open source. Early on in my open source journey, I was building apps for Windows 8. Remember that? And Xamarin. I had just started at a consulting company in New York called Blue Metal Architects. We had the chance to build cutting-edge applications for our clients. We were fast and agile in our craft. It really felt great to be able to use the latest techniques and tools to develop high-quality solutions for our clients. At the time, in 2012, most of the common libraries were for .NET Framework and weren't portable. Windows 8 and Xamarin were both pretty new, and the vast majority of these libraries on NuGet didn't target them yet, but they were open source. So who has been there before? Say me in the chat if this sounds like one of the projects you've had to put up with. So I could have been stuck, but I hate being stuck. It was quite a problem to solve. So when it came down to it, I realized I had a couple of options. Now, I could have given up and seen that they don't support Windows 8 and rewritten similar things from scratch. And I did try that. I did this once or twice. And let me tell you, the ideas in my head for what the library would look like when I was done were far grander than what I had time to create. Deadlines are deadlines, after all. It required way more time and resources than were available at the time. The other option, and some of you may have already tried this before on your projects in the past, I decided I could add support for Windows 8 and Portable to the code so I could use it and move on. This allowed others to benefit from my experience too. When possible, I would contribute directly to the original project. Often, it was a fairly small set of build-related updates, taking the existing code, making it portable, and then submitting it back as a pull request. I would then work with the maintainer so they'd understand the updates. I mean, I wasn't signing up to own these changes forever, so it was important to make sure the maintainers understood and were comfortable with the updates. In some cases, the projects were stale, or the maintainers just simply weren't interested in taking the changes. Luckily, with open source, I was able to fork the repository, make my changes, and publish a new package with a different name. I would then regularly pull in the upstream changes and maintain it as needed. This option worked great for me. So what? Why should you do it? Wouldn't it be nice if all of our bugs are fixed for us automatically? Unfortunately, that's not the case. But let's talk about why we should adopt the open source mindset. At first, you might think, I can't spend time at work for improving this other thing. I already work 40 to 50 hours a week while also being a teacher for my kids. And I get it. I do. The thing is that ultimately time is what costs. And given the options of creating something new or contributing the support back to the original project, creating something new was always the more expensive choice. Why should you do it? Well, for one thing, it's the least expensive choice. Building it yourself is way more expensive in time, in people, in product development, in marketing, in training, in support. Think about it. How many hours went into that library you want to use? It absolutely saves you time if you don't have to recreate it each time. What parts of it do you think you'd be able to recreate? Well, what is your business even good at? Is it making refrigerators? How about medical equipment? Are you writing a trading system? Or perhaps the next must-play game? There's an old joke. We'll build a soil moisture tracker, but before we do, we'll invent a new JavaScript framework first. I mean, you don't produce unit test frameworks. Why are you writing a new unit test framework? Do you really need to write yet another JSON parser? Spend the time on what makes your company unique, what makes you competitive, and what brings value to your customers. Don't succumb to NIH syndrome, not invented here. Have you heard of that? Does your company suffer from that? I know plenty of mine that I worked at certainly did. I mean, how much are you actually able to do? Well, whatever your business is good at, you can focus on what you are good at instead of trying to spend so many precious resources on reinventing the wheel. What happens if you do create a new thing? Well, now you're not just creating it once, but now that thing has to be supported by you and your team forever. There's new features, there's edge cases and bugs. You've just created a new product, though probably not the one you were intending to. What do we get? More bugs. That's more lines of code, more room for bugs, a higher learning curve for new developers joining the project as they learn your custom thing. It typically takes months to bring a new developer up to speed, taking time from the existing team as they mentor and share the institutional knowledge. The more custom software they need to come up to speed on, the longer it takes. Furthermore, upon analysis, it becomes apparent that the cheaper option for your company, for your client, is to take the time and fix up that external dependency. Using existing open source libraries and tools means less code for you to maintain in the long run. It also means other developers on the team may be familiar with that dependency already, so the learning curve is less. And the project that has been going on for years is likely to have far more features than a cut down version you'd build yourself. Contributing to open source elevates you, and you can be rewarded by your community. People notice. You may be recognized. Over the normal course of writing the mobile applications I was being assigned for work, I was able to take many of the dependencies and add support for Windows 8 and Xamarin. Microsoft noticed my efforts and awarded me as an MVP. And it sure was nice to be recognized. I mean, I solved a major issue. I fixed some bugs. Yay! A number of years back, I wanted to make a mobile application for interacting with my TiVo for fun. TiVo is a digital video recorder that works in place of a cable box with a network API that someone reverse engineered in Java. And I wanted to make an app to control it. And I sure wasn't going to use Java for it. The first step was to find the devices on the network. And TiVo used a protocol called Bonjour ZeroConf, or MDNS, that allows its IP address to be found on the local network. By the way, many of the IoT devices on your home network today use this so that the app on your phone can find the device. Anyway, I noticed that there weren't any active zeroconf.net projects for this, but some of the underpinnings were around in other forms, like DNS parsers. So I created a library called zeroconf as a separate project that my app would use. Ultimately, my TiVo app never went anywhere, as there wound up being a ton of hidden complexity there. But the zeroconf library lives on and is being actively used by many other projects to this day, including Visual Studio. I think that's kind of cool. Now, I could have just put this functionality in my main app, like a monolith, but by factoring that part out into a separate project, others were able to benefit from it long after the main project fizzled out. For me, this was a passion project, but this could have just as easily been a line of business app at work. These days, I don't spend a lot of time maintaining the library, but when people find issues and submit pull requests with fixes, I will accept them and publish new releases. So the project does live on. Like my ZeroConf library, many projects are started as passion projects. We get hooked on a problem, and along the way towards solving it, we create projects that do parts of the work. So what happens is, passion projects can become dependencies of big, successful applications. And when that happens, the maintainer may get overburdened and burned out. Worlds collide when a passion project becomes a popular dependency. For example, Image Sharp has become the de facto way of doing image manipulation on web servers with .NET. Several years ago, recognizing that there was no supported built-in way of doing this, James South created the library on his spare time to fill that gap. Over the subsequent years, as the library grew in popularity, maintaining the library became all-consuming of James's time to the point where it no longer became a passion. In many ways, he felt like a slave to the project, and he didn't want to let folks down, leading to this series of tweets over the summer. He announces it, this 6 million downloads, and then it gradually progresses until it turns into a cry for help. What James really wants is to have a sustainable project where users of the library help contribute to bug fixes, performance updates, and completing in-progress support for additional popular image formats. And here's the thing. This isn't an isolated case. Daniel Palm, the author of Report Generator, chimed in on a thread saying that with 15 million downloads, not a single person has sponsored it, even financially. Report Generator generates code coverage visualizations that are widely used in CI and CD pipelines. Companies take it for granted and use it to improve the quality of their code without any giveback. This XKCD comic sums it up nicely. So much of the world's applications are reliant on the hard work of individual developers doing things in their spare time. So in this cartoon, we see an all-modern digital infrastructure being held up by this teeny, tiny, wobbly little kickstand that's about to collapse. As a dependency of open source and all these mega projects, that little maintainer is propping up all these businesses, and having additional help with maintainers will ease the strain in the system. And then in return, they are contributing stuff back, which will help keep the system stabilized and less wobbly. Open source can also mean projects within a company that are open to each other. It's not just public projects. Traditionally, most companies have teams that own pieces of the code that they're responsible for. If you need something from a partner team, then you have to schedule a meeting, raise an issue, have another meeting, and hope that it gets prioritized in a way that your team can work with. People aren't generally empowered to submit code changes to other teams directly for review. These are the so-called silos we always hear about. Silos create communication problems. The message gets muddled when we can't empathize with another department and how they operate. When we shift the conversation from public projects and turn the lens inward towards your own company infrastructure and operations, we can see other benefits to adopting the open source mindset. More companies are starting to realize the benefits of inner source and are enabling internal teams to contribute patches to other teams' code, much like they can with public open source. An inner source approach allows teams to collaborate more, break down silos, share more code, and move the organization forward as a more unified whole. Silos create communication problems. Most successful open source happens at scale because of the self-interest of companies. Monetization usually isn't the initial goal. Instead, people look to provide solutions to problems, sometimes small, sometimes larger. As the problem grows bigger, demand for the project grows, and revenue-generating businesses are established to support its growth, often centered around providing enterprise support to large organizations. There are a few different monetization strategies commonly used. Commercial support is one of the most established. Customers pay to ensure security, bug fixes, and have assurances that the project will be maintained. Red Hat's entire business model is centered here, building and selling support for Linux and its ecosystem to enterprises. Open Core, which is a blend of free to use with paid light-up components that are proprietary. This model enables community awareness and contributions while having varying monetization options. Docker, Elastic, and Redis are examples of open core-based companies. A more recent strategy is that of a corporate-sponsored project. Here, the software isn't the primary offering. Instead, the projects are there to support other products and services offered. Google isn't maintaining Kubernetes out of kindness. They do it because they use it in their cloud infrastructure, and they're able to derive value from it. People collaborate with Google on it because they have a vested interest in their own business. AWS and Azure will both happily sell you Kubernetes-based services. Other companies have other products and services for managing Kubernetes clusters. Each of these companies are paying people to work on it, and they have a way they are using that project as part of their revenue stream. Paying folks to contribute to Kubernetes is simply a cost of doing business. Benefits. Now let's talk about the benefits of adopting an open source mindset. We talked about why an open source mindset might be implemented, what it looks like in the public realm and within your company. A little later, I will present some examples of companies who have adopted an open source mindset partially and wholly. So right now, let's talk about the benefits. Open and inner source is fundamentally about collaboration. Collaboration is key, and we do it everywhere to learn and improve from things that already exist. For example, scientists of all stripes publish papers that get reviewed by their peers and are in turn based off of other papers that were similarly reviewed. The scientists base their new discovery on findings on the work that already came before. Each research team doesn't start from scratch. Someone learning to cook might ask a friend who does it well and learn from their technique. They might then look up more information online and perhaps even make some improvements that suit them. This is how it works in my life. We all have a friend who has a friend with the perfect pizza crust recipe or cookie recipe. One of my besties, Christina, makes sourdough bread. She was making sourdough bread long before the coronavirus hit, but she makes sourdough bread. And no matter how much I knead the bread and work the dough, I'm never going to get the technique down without her guidance. I mean, a collaborative approach could be as simple as modifying the recipe to your aunt's favorite apple crumble pie and sharing what you did. These are all forms of collaboration. Open source is collaboration for software developers. We take the best ideas from the community, improve upon them with our own needs, and then contribute back to them so others can benefit and do the same. a continuous cycle of improvement. In order to be able to accept contributions, it's vital to be able to validate them. That means automated test coverage, CI and CD, and other quality checks that run. It's much easier to accept a new contribution from an internal or external person when you are passing tests to back up the changes and minimize the risk of regressions. We all know of systems that need that special trick to build or that secret incantation to deploy, but only on Tuesdays of the third leap year and during a blue moon. It's part of the technical debt that's been accruing. I'm not here to shame your system. We know when things need to be updated. Listen, it's time to pay the piper and automate those systems. You don't need me to tell you that automating your build and deploy will pay dividends. There's plenty of evidence out there for that. Fully automated systems with sufficient test coverage will help prevent bugs, even from your own team's check-ins. If you're not sure where to start, let's take a note from my previous point about collaboration. Most open source projects have CI and CD pipelines set up already. So you can find a project that uses a similar technology to what you're using, see how they did it, and apply the knowledge and scripts to your own system. There's a check for collaboration already. Adopting an open source mindset keeps egos in check. How, you ask? Well, open source is a team sport. There's no room for cowboy coders and developers who call themselves 10x engineers. Cowboy coders work well alone, but they rarely, if ever, work well on a team. They struggle to collaborate, and as we learned earlier, collaboration is an essential element to adopting the open source mindset. Adopting an open source mindset improves communication, and communication is a trait of emotional intelligence. This is how. Peer reviews through pull requests are a big part of open source. I mean, think about it. All contributors, new and seasoned, have their contributions reviewed to ensure quality. Taking and giving feedback can be hard. There's a balance of grace and tact needed so that the people involved don't feel demoralized or discouraged. Cultivating better communication skills improves project efficiency and relieves frustrations. Not only that, but as a global endeavor, there are often cultural and language barriers to overcome. So it's important to be concise and clear when communicating. Between the latest technical jargon and the cultural language barriers, even people speaking the same language can have major unintentional implications that negatively impact the project. Improve your reputation. The open source mindset is good for your branding and for your company's reputation. Goodwill towards the tech community is seen in a positive light, and that's good marketing. And it's something you can't buy. You are seen as an innovative company in the technical community by giving back instead of just taking. Being seen as an innovative company helps with your hiring. You'll get a better stream of developers who want to work for you as they notice that your company is doing cool things and is being a team player in the ecosystem. A growing number of companies have major open source projects out in the wild, including traditionally conservative financial institutions like TD Ameritrade that open sourced a Python library to identify patterns and anomalies in time series data. Capital One is another example that we will talk about later. Another trait of emotional intelligence is mentorship. Hiring managers always look for candidates with high emotional intelligence. So if you are looking to get an edge over your colleagues, cultivating emotional intelligence skills is a proven way to get that job promotion. An open source mindset involves mentorship. Like any large group, there are always people who are just getting started. No one starts in open source as an expert. Everyone starts with a small pull request somewhere. Mentors help guide the newer people towards success, and there's mutual benefit there too. The new contributor learns how to participate in open source, and the mentor gains insight to the perspective of a new user, which they can then use to improve the tools, documentation, and processes all up. Tony Hsieh, a brilliant leader and visionary who just passed, it was very unfortunate. He had a program at Zappos that encouraged cross-departmental engagement monthly so that people were familiar with who they should talk to in accounting, or HR, or marketing, and how the department operated. This, like so many of Tony's ideas, was a terrific way to create empathy within the company culture. He was loved by so many, and he will be greatly missed. Another great influencer in the tech community is Brad Wilson. Project maintainers like Brad Wilson, the XUnit test framework author, regularly stream on Twitch as they work on their code. Unlike seeing the end result, a tailored high quality experience, the streams are raw and vulnerable. They show the thought processes, the mistakes and successes, and raw emotions that go into these projects. Viewers can participate, they ask questions, then learn from the experience in ways that were never possible before. Comments from viewers prove that people like to watch the thought processes. They want to see the types of mistakes others make and how they respond. So learning new ways to respond is another way to adopt the open source mindset. The open source mindset is win-win for people who contribute. Companies contribute their time and they get value back. People will learn the technology better. You get more engaged team members. They learn from others' mistakes. The open source mindset has created new opportunities for sharing more than just results. As we saw, the process of creating the code is now often streamed live, which helps people understand how to fix bugs better. It's a win-win scenario. And there's one final point about the benefits of adopting an open source mindset that I'd like to make. In doing the research for this talk, Harvard researchers found that companies that contribute to open source get up to 2 times more productivity out of open source compared to companies that only consume it. Let me say that again. By contributing back to open source, you'll actually be twice as productive as if you're only just consuming it. And that's because actively contributing helps your team better understand how to apply that code to your projects. You and your company will be more productive when you contribute back. Legacy waterfall approaches, where every detail is meticulously planned out, gives way towards a more iterative and responsive process. It's not to say that open source projects aren't planned out, but that they are able to adapt and respond to change faster. And when you get it fixed faster, open source allows teams to get features fixed faster than closed source if they're willing to put in the time. With closed source, you'd file an issue on a vendor system and then wait and wait and wait some more. What might be a key blocking issue for you may be considered an edge case by the vendor. They may acknowledge the issue, but it may never get prioritized. With open source, you can submit a patch for the issue. Maintainers are far more likely to take patches for things than go out of their way to fix things just for you. In the event a project isn't timely on accepting the fix you need, you have the ultimate power. Fork it. You can create your own copy of the code with your changes and move forward. Contributors come from all walks of life, from all backgrounds. It's important to be inclusive so that projects can benefit from a diversity of ideas and perspectives. Language used in open source collaborations should be professional and respectful, avoiding microaggressions, and it should be actively moderated. Expectations should be made clear via a code of conduct that's enforced. Historically, there has been a perception that some open source communities have been more hostile than others, but it's changing. People have put up with toxic language because allegedly folks may have written good code, but that's not healthy. And as more people contribute and offer feedback, it's changing everywhere. The .NET Foundation and Microsoft want to make sure we are fostering healthy communities and that everyone should be able to contribute without being harassed, and strong projects have codes of conduct that are enforced to make sure contributors are behaving professionally and to ensure all people are welcome to the community. So these are the benefits: collaborative perspective, automated validation, helps keep egos in check, improves reputation, helps with mentorship, helps learn in new ways. It's win-win, improves your velocity, and fosters healthy communities. So you might be thinking, these benefits are great, Claire, but how does my company adopt the open source mindset? Well, I'll tell you how. First of all, I'm not here to tell you that you should adopt an open source mindset just to be a good citizen. Don't do it because you have to be a good citizen. I mean, be a good citizen regardless, but adopt an open source mindset because it's just smart business. So let's talk about the business case for adopting an open source mindset. In doing the research for this talk, I found this example in Capital One's open source journey. Initially, their dev teams were mainly outsourced all over the world, and they were 100% waterfall, which is important for an offshore team. They needed to do all this planning up front so they could coordinate and set the features set. The processes to get deployments from builds to testing were completely manual. There was needed people with special knowledge to both run the build system, take the output, set it up in an environment, and then do the smoke testing to make sure that it worked. They were entirely in data centers. They weren't using the cloud at all. And then, if any teams wanted to use open source in the project, they had to fill out an open source approval form, send it to legal, and get sign off. I bet most projects didn't use too much open source at that point, given the obstacles. So they wanted to change this. They started with an open source control tool And along the way, they had to address concerns over, well, who do you call if it breaks? Who's going to support it? And then, when scanning their internal code base, they found that internally there were many copies of open source libraries. Many of them were old and out of date, probably with security vulnerabilities too. Those libraries were stuck in time. So, what to do with custom and modified libraries? Well, they had to start contributing back, because when one team fixes a bug only for themselves, that prevents other teams, both internally and externally, from benefiting from the fix. I mean, the library is literally stuck. They can't upgrade to a new version of the library without losing the fix that they put in. So as they were changing their mindset, they didn't want to give away their IP. I mean, the secret stuff, right? So they found ways to contribute back without exposing the key processes. They worked with their legal department to come up with a streamlined process for onboarding and approving open source libraries. Starting in 2014, they had their first contribution to a test automation library. You know, that infrastructure we talked about earlier. Later on, they open sourced an internal DevOps tool, Hygenia, in 2015, and that became one of the hottest projects of the year. They found that contributing to open source helped their company's reputation. They started participating in discussions as a member of the Linux Foundation and the Apache Foundation. They worked with their to establish internal governance to handle open source projects. So dealing with everything from branding, governance, resourcing, and funding. In the end, what they found was that the open source mindset helped open up this culture of continuous innovation. It enabled them to collect the best ideas and build the best sites and apps with them. After all, they didn't have to start from scratch when they could leverage the amazing work that the community has been doing. So how does this fit into your day-to-day? Why bother? You're already overwhelmed. You're already busy. Why bother? Well, because with consistent actions, improvements are made. You collect the best ideas, you collaborate on them, encourage interdepartmental knowledge sharing, and the same principles apply to teams being open source within your company. So how might you bring open source mindset to your existing team? We can motivate others by helping them understand that many hands make light work. When a few people submit just one patch, and there are lots of companies out there, then lots of bugs can be fixed, just like Sisyphus with his boulder. And it's important to mention here that there has to be a risk assessment to balance things out. If you put too many resources towards developing open source software, the company would go bankrupt. That's not what I'm suggesting here. I'm suggesting a better balance of give and take to find the right equilibrium for you. Return on investment, your ROI. Adopting an open source mindset is not without self-interest. Let's face it, it's got to improve your quality of life, or why bother? With open source, we can leverage the scale of all the other people who aren't working for you. All the other users benefit from it, and there may be hundreds or thousands of contributors who are putting it back in there. You are reaping the benefit of those hundreds or thousands of people contributing. You're benefiting from everyone else's time that they put in, and you didn't have to put in thousands of hours. A healthy ecosystem has multiple people who are contributing and giving feedback. We want the diversity of their points of view. The ecosystem needs givers and not just takers. Otherwise, there will be nothing left. Use self-interest to convince your company to adopt an open source mindset, because employees will benefit 1,000 times, because it is in the best interest of the company to benefit from the extra input. And when everyone contributes back, we get a bug-free world and everybody wins. Everybody wins. Thank you.